Are we going to stop? Are we going to say something? That's all the number of people there? Okay, what else? I'll sit there and talk. Instead of sitting. Can you all see me?
Yes.
I assume you can hear me. How many of you are going to appear for the interviews for the first time? Large number. Second time? Third time? 3 of you? 4 of you? Very nice. My name is Satish Inamdar. I used to be in the Air Force for a while, about 42 years. And then I was put into the UPSC by the President of India. It's very interesting 5-6 years in UPSC. And I have so much to share with young people. Various areas, civil services. Many years back in Missouri, there was a lecturer who went to speak to the academy. And I don't know who the lecturer was, this is a story. It's a very apocryphal story, it never actually happened. But the story I kept hearing in Missouri for over the years that I keep visiting it. He kept asking students, am I edible at the back? 2-3 times he asked it. One student got it right to the back. So, he said, yes, sir, you are perfectly edible. But I have one point about this mess in this academy. He said, what? He said, the food is not audible at all. This is a very old story in Missouri. You are edible in the hall, but the food is not audible at all. As long as you hear me, it's goodness, it's good thing, happiness. What I plan to do is, I'll run through a section of areas which I think you would benefit from. And at the end of it, this is what I normally do. I do these things very often all over the country. I'll give you much more time for Q&As. And my experience tells me that Q&As, each question taken to its logical conclusion individually adds much more to your collective information bank, a knowledge bank, and covering a large number of areas. I also satisfy individual curiosities which I presume represent the curiosities of a large number of people, because since you work together, live together, think together, same age group. So Q&A I find benefits all of you substantially more than just a stereotyped lecture. There are some misconceptions about UPSC interviews. Those who have been there once or twice, you can tell you more about it in the individual chats. But there are lots of misconceptions. One of the major misconceptions amongst candidates who come to UPSC is that it is not right not to know an answer to a question. What that results in is that you start, if you're asked a question which you don't know much about, you start brooding over it, and people start doing all sorts of Bharatanatyam. They start look here, look there, they start mumbling something, or get the impression of mumbling something which is actually doing nothing. And then that results in you wasting your time, the interview time, and the 4 gentlemen sitting there, the chairman of the board, knows exactly that you're swimming. None of those theatrics go very far. In short, the moment you realize you don't know the answer, quickly say, I don't know the answer. Can I have the next question, please? Because there's nobody in the interview board, including those 4 gentlemen and the chairman sitting there, have answers to all the questions in the world. If they did, they would be sitting somewhere else, not in UPSC. They would be God. So there's no harm in not knowing the answer to the question being asked, please quickly say, sorry, I don't have, I'm not sure whether I know the answer, can I have the next question please? And don't start guessing, never guess. Because you cannot outguess those 4 or 5 guys sitting there. They are far too gone in experience and knowledge to be hooked in by anybody else. Never ever outguess, try to outguess the, guess and outguess the questions and questioners. Point number 1. Number 2, don't dilate on the answers. If the answer is, if the question is precise, make your answer precise. You heard of a bulletized form of writing answers? A paper, anything? Bullets? Isn't bullets? Anybody get it out? Your answers, vocal answers can also be bulletized. Don't make it tuck tuck, sir, point number 1, point number 2, don't do it like that. But structure it like a bulletized reply. It goes, it sits, it accesses the interviewers much better than a narrative, long narrative. If they want you to expand away the bullets, do it. But first, tell them, give them bulletized reply, a brief, curt, crisp reply for about a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes. Very crucial. In any answer that you give in UPSC interviews, I should tell my students, my candidates, please remember 3 things. A, first say in the first 30 seconds what you're going to say. Then say it for the next 1 minute. In the last 15 seconds, tell them what you just said. What it means is introduction, body, conclusion. Without calling it introduction, body and conclusion, that's what it means. First, quickly say what you're going to say, then say it, and then round it up by telling them what you just said. A lot of time for these 3 things, proportionately and appropriately. The second part being the longest. First and third being the shortest. Very, very important, because nobody is there to, they don't have the time or the mood to listen to long narratives from anyone of you. They just want to know whether you know that subject. There are 2 ways of knowing a subject from the interview's point of view. Either listen to the whole 9 yards of what you have to say, or get to know within the first half a minute, 2 minutes that this guy knows or this lady knows. You know what I mean? Any doubts on this? What I'm saying? Very important point. Please remember it very clearly. They don't have to listen to the whole answer from you to know that you know the answer. They know it. As you start talking, they know it. Very often, one of the interviewers might tell you this. We tell them not to do it. The advisors, we keep advising them. But they tell you, it's okay, I got it. Next question. What he means is, he knows, doesn't have a full answer, but he knows that you know the subject. This comes with experience. Another 40 years' time, you probably have the same experience. But that's a long time to go. Now, when you get to answer questions like this, your questions become compact, concise, and precise. And given the same knowledge level, information level of candidates who answer it concisely and precisely, without being abrupt. There's a difference between being precise, concise, and being abrupt. Don't be abrupt. A person should not ask you, what did you say? What is it? You missed out something. Nobody should have to get into dialogue with you. The best interviews are where the interview board, or the questioners, don't have to keep interjecting to amplify the question. The moment that starts happening, you know you are not on the right track. Take cue from it. You must know. Because he knows that you are not on track. He won't be interjecting otherwise. The interviews are held in a very, very friendly atmosphere, very friendly, at least I used to hold my interviews in a very friendly manner. We have to keep telling my advisors, you must mentor them into answering right. You don't have to coach them into answering right, but mentor them into answering it right. My experience tells me, our experience tells me that the moment a candidate enters UPSC, he suffers from what is known as a performance degradation. What we call battle degradation in the armed forces. You know your warfare very well, but into the battlefield, there is a degradation. You reach on an enemy target in an aeroplane, you've flown that aeroplane well, you know the sighting well, you know the bombing well, you know how to take on the air defense aircraft, but when you reach the actual battle conditions, there is a performance degradation. And that degradation is what I'm talking about candidates who did come to the UPSC. It's natural. It's natural. A, because of an aura built around UPSC, for right or wrong, I think for wrong reasons. And there is a certain amount of nervousness in all of us. If anybody says, I'm not nervous or I'm not scared, he or she either doesn't know or is being very economical with the truth. You have to be nervous or has to be scared. Because courage is not absence of fear. Courage is your capacity to overcome fear. To be afraid, to be nervous is a very natural thing. Shows intelligence. Absence of fear shows lack of intelligence. So being nervous is nothing wrong with it. You must know how to overcome it. Overcome it in an interview, in a situation, in a confrontation, anywhere you go. So with this degradation setting in, we tell the advisors that they come with this lowered performance level. Please help them getting out of it whichever way you can. The chairman of the board normally take the lead in this by getting the candidate seating comfortably, give him a glass of water, ask him some inane questions to get him generally open up. And when the candidates open up with the kind of huge preparation that you all put in, the flow becomes very smooth. And we wait for that thing to start. And in fact, we encourage that to start because then that's when you get to know the candidate very well. And to get the candidate to open up and talk is the responsibility, prime responsibility of the board. 4 people and plus 1. They have to do this. We make sure there is a mechanism to make sure that it happens. But as far as the board is concerned, as far as you are concerned, you must know how to overcome your twitches, your nervousness, your fears. Get over it. There are various ways of doing it. You must have been told in your coaching classes. But be very conscious of it. Be very natural. Very often, you will find the interview boards tell the candidate, talk slowly. I have been told all my life, I speak very fast. A lot of candidates speak very fast in the interviews. So you will find the interviewers telling him, chairman telling him mostly, slow down, talk slowly. Now talk slowly does not mean talk softly. The moment you tell the candidate to talk slowly, he lowers his volume. That's not the idea. It's to lower the pace of delivery. That's slower. If somebody tells you to talk softly, yes, that's volume. But don't mistake softness for slowness. It has because if this doesn't get sorted out initially, the interview starts off on a wrong foot that you can't be heard or you're not intelligible because of the speed of delivery. So make a distinction between talking softly and talking slowly. Talk slowly, talk reasonable volume, but make an impact on people listening to you. And that you will make only if you are very clear about the answer, well composed in your mind, your delivery is well composed, and you have practiced it a number of times. Nobody in the UPSC board has ever been fussy, at least in the last 15 years that I know about UPSC. But everybody is speaking Queen's English. If you are speaking in English, it's not an issue at all. You should be intelligible. You should be able to communicate what you're saying clearly and correctly to people who are listening to you, either the interview board or your subordinates later in life or your staff or whatever. If you are fluent in particular language, use that language. Now I think they allow you to speak in various languages. Do that. Feel free. But some people prefer to speak in what Navbharat time calls English, HINGLISH. Use it, no problem. Half English, half Hindi. Feel free, absolutely free. By and large, the composition is such that the people sitting there are adept at Hindi and English both, at least, if not one or two of the regional languages. If you go beyond that, then they have the services of an interpreter available to them, who comes and who chips in and who sits there, and he or she helps you out. There's also once again, not a misconception, but somehow it's been perpetuated outside the UPSC that you must have a certain dress code to come to the UPSC. And the dress code becomes such a boring sight. Plain shirt, striped shirt, black tie, black plain trousers, black shoes, ladies with a hanky, nothing in this thing, wristwatch, no jewelry, no nothing, plain sarees, plain. It's good. The essential point is you should be dressed appropriately. Being appropriately dressed is far more important than being dressed well. Nobody's interested in dressing well, as long as you are dressed appropriately. When you are appropriately dressed, what also happens, which you may not realize, is that you are very comfortable. And when you are very comfortable, you perform at your best. If you are not used to wearing 3-piece suits or 2-piece suits or neckties, don't wear them. Don't cramp your style. Everybody has a comfort zone, women and men. Stick to that. That's when you give out your best. This also doesn't mean that you come to the winter board in your night suit. No, it's not that. Wear something which you wear outside, but your zone of comfort is very, very crucial. If you've been told to wear a plain shirt and a black tie or a striped shirt and a solid color tie, whatever, do that, but then get used to it over a period of time. And this applies largely to people who wear jackets and coats like these when you come to the interview. They come and sit there with all buttoned up nicely, then they have to be told, now that you're sitting down, please unbutton your jacket, unbutton your coat. No, sir, I'm okay. So, no, it's not okay. Please unbutton your coat. Two reasons for this, because this requirement of dress code that if you're wearing a jacket, you must unbutton it when you're sitting down. Button it up once you get up. That's number one. Other reason is also kind on the buttons. Because to see the buttons being strained in the interview is a terrible sight. If the buttons would cry, they would shout. They don't, because they can't speak. But to the other viewers, it's quite a horrid sight, the buttons stretching and sort of sad sight. That's all there is to dress code. There's nothing more specific, nothing more elaborate about the dress code. Nothing. If anybody's ever told you that go in particular whether it's suit or a silk sari or this and that, nobody looks at your dress except unless the dress hurts you. Nobody in the interview board looks at your clothes unless the clothes tend to hurt the sensibilities of the people sitting there. Hurt them, not please them. Don't try to please the sensibilities of the interview board. Try not to hurt it, that's all. Can you get the difference right? Don't hurt it, that's all. If you don't hurt it, inconspicuous, perfect. Nobody is there to dress you get you on your dress code and your sense of attire. Not the point. When speaking English, try and avoid saying yeah. It's a no-no in UPS. We were told in school, you say yeah to a junior friend, junior or a friend, not to anybody who's older to you, not to a person who's senior to you. You say yes. It's very jarring to have a candidate saying yeah all the time to interview boards who are 30 years older to him, very, very senior functionaries. I'm not even talking about chairman. Chairman is very senior. It's very jarring. I try and avoid it. It's not a good thing to do. Avoid saying yeah. Just say yes. Yes, sir, if you don't say it, yes, ma'am, but yes instead of yeah. Just scrupulously avoid the word yeah in the interview boards. Anywhere in life, talking to a senior or older person, at home also, don't use these words. You'll get into the habit of doing the right thing. If you do these few things, and there's a large number of them that don't come to my mind, you will find you will have covered a large amount of ground as far as the interview is concerned, assuming that you know your subject well. There is no substitute to knowing subject well. Let me not give the impression to you that all this will make up for the depth of knowledge. No way. You are there basically to substantiate or lend substance to or to prove that what you've written in the examinations is actually something you know well. Because there can be a gap between what you write and when you speak about it, there can be gaps. Those gaps must not be obvious in the interview. You've done well, that's why you're going to the interview. You've written well, both exams, prelims, mains. If you hadn't done well, you won't be there for the interviews. Right? Now, having proved your worth as a person who has the knowledge to produce it on black and white, you've got to make sure that you do it verbally, vocally. Because 90% of your job in life is going to be vocal communication. And more vocal your communication is, the better for the system, the less written it is, better for the system. A written document, written paperwork is to actually back up what you're telling somebody vocally. You have to be good at writing, eventually you find that, but your communication must emphasize vocal communication, and that can come only if you follow some of these tips. I'm sure it's been covered in your interview classes or mock interview classes or whatever. It's very important to have vocal communication skills better than your written communication skills if you can help it. In life, as administrators, as SDMs, collectors, DMs, commissioners, or secretaries, you'll find you communicate more effectively if you have a good system of communicating it verbally. If you don't have it, okay, it doesn't matter, I'll send it to you in writing. The moment you said that, that guy switched off. Subordinate, senior, whoever it is. You must be able to, it doesn't matter what language, it does not matter what language you talk. I'm not emphasizing, I'm re-emphasizing the point. It's not necessary to do it in English, Hindi, any language. Any language which you're comfortable in, you must be able to speak. I've had people coming to UPSC interviews. I've been through about 1,600 of them so far. Yeah, at least 1,600, 6 years period. And then subsequently in other boards. You have an issue with, the candidates have an issue with saying something, meaning something else, or meaning something and saying something else. Never ever do that. The moment you start using the expression, so what I meant to say was, you're finished. मेरा कहने का मतलब ये था, you're done. ये कहने का मतलब तो था, वो शुरू में होना चाहिए जो आपने जब कहा था. If you have to, I call them fillers. Don't use these fillers. They tend to detract from your performance if it's good. Say what you mean the first time. If you want to correct it, say it categorically. Sir, can I put it differently? Say it again. But मेरा कहने का मतलब ये था, what I meant to say is this, it shows very poor communication skill. Also shows a very muddled up mind. And a person with a muddled up mind usually won't have a very unmuddled way of working. Doesn't happen. By and large, larger percentile of people. Be precise, be crisp. If you made a mistake, the moment you realize it, I think I made a mistake there. Can I say it again? Can I put it in a different way? They'll appreciate that more than you using constantly going from, sir, what I meant to say was this, मेरे कहने का मतलब ये था, मेरे कहने का मतलब वो नहीं था, I didn't mean to say that, this is what I mean to say. It's very confusing. You're confusing the world out of these 4 guys, 5 guys sitting there. Don't do that. Simple rule. Mean what you say and say what you mean. And say it in as few words as possible. When I was a young officer in the Air Force, I was told by my first commanding officer, he gave me a tip on being a good public speaker. He said, Ramda, you want to become a good public speaker, speaking to the airmen, officers, civilians in the Air Force. Just remember 3 things. Make a very crisp, short beginning. Make a very crisp, short ending. And try and keep the two as close to each other as possible. Good essence of public speaking. Keep the end and the beginning as close to each other as possible. You don't have too much of a gap between them. It helps. So what you want to say, you should have the ability to marshal your thoughts, compose an answer, take time, don't jump into an answer immediately after you're asked. Don't have to start shooting. Ask you something, I asked you something. Take your time. I'm not saying a minute or 2 minutes, but regurgitate. You know what regurgitation means? Have you been told about it? Methods of teaching. Regurgitation is, how do you put it? Huh?
Content reducer.
Sorry? No, regurgitation is reorganizing everything in your mind. Uthal-puthal karna, stirring it everything and putting it in order and then talking about it. That's what I meant. That's regurgitation. Reorganize the whole thing, usko upar se karke, niche se karke, shake it up and then deliver it smoothly. That art, that's an art. It will help you if you think about it, read about it and imbibe it. Your answers become more logical, more concise, more precise and they meet the timeline better than anything else in life. The moment you start dilating your answer, you find people switch off. Stay on the central line. If you're not sure about an answer, as I told in the beginning, get the answer question repeated. Never ever start answering a question in UPSC without having understood the question 110%. Even 99 won't do. You know what I mean? Get the question very, very clear. Get the question repeated. The German will tell you this, that we'll repeat the question for 10 times. 10 बार दोहरा देंगे उसको, 20 बार दोहरा देंगे, but उसको समझिए अच्छी तरह से. उसकी बारीकियां समझिए, उसके fine point समझिए, उसका main thrust समझिए, and then start answering it. Never make the mistake of answering a question, starting answering in a hurry without understanding the question. Because if you are at a variance from the question, first thing you'll hear is, it's okay. We'll go to the next question. Unless you ask the question to be repeated, nobody will repeat it for you. They assume that you don't know. Dangerous thing to happen. If you know it, don't let it happen. Right? Get it clarified once. They'll do it 10 times, not a problem. They're paid for that. But never jump into starting an answer without getting the question 100% right. Your body language in an interview, I don't know if you've ever been told about body language, etc. It's something that comes to a lot of us naturally by upbringing at home, grooming in schools, grooming in colleges. But all those who are not beneficiary of these three, you must know about it. Never be negative, militant or hostile in the way you sit, talk, look at people. There are ways of avoiding this. Have they covered this little covered body language in the interviews?
No, not much. It will be covered from tomorrow onwards.
It will be covered. Yes. Well, he tells me, the director tells me it's going to be covered in great detail. I'm very happy to hear that. Once that's covered, you will not have doubts on this. But keep this point in the back of your mind. Your body language must be complementary to your answers, not contradictory. Very important. When you're answering a particular interviewer, advisor, look him or her into the eyes, straight into the eyes. Have a firm eye contact with the person. Don't shift. It reveals a part of the personality. What are these interview boards called? Personality, PT boards. It's not interview board. UPSC's technical name is still called PT boards.
Personality test.
There you are. Understand the essence of personality test as different from as interview board. What most companies and everywhere they do is they do interview board. UPSC is a personality test, a PT board. And there's much more in PT boards than there is in just an interview board. Much more. And that's what we're talking about. Understand it, even after this talk, after the lectures. Understand the subject, go in to read about it, go Google it, and see what you can avoid. It's very, two candidates given the same knowledge of, same level of knowledge, personality, height, education, everything. Person who has a better body language scores. You can't help it, it's human. And when I say personality, it has nothing to do with how short you are, how tall you are, how fair you are, how dark you are, how good looking you are, bad looking you are, it doesn't make a difference. Personality is very different from your usual definition of personality. It has a lot more ingredients than just plain looks. And it's extremely crucial, not only in UPSC interviews, even subsequently in life when you go as IAS officers, IFS officers, police officers. Personality has a lot of concomitants. And those must be understood very clearly. A good time to start that is now when you go for an interview board, PT board, and UPSC. Never too early. What is coming? Is this coming? Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thanks, sir. Thank you. Now, a quick review. Have I made sense so far or no?
Yes.
How much of it is nonsense? Be frank, because I'll restructure it accordingly. This is what I call a mid-course correction. We all need to make mid-course corrections. No matter how much experience you have, nothing like a mid-course correction. Even the Mangalyaan needs a mid-course correction. We're only human beings.
So, excuse me, sir.
Yep.
If you don't mind, can you give us an example of how would you present an answer? Very few. I would really appreciate it.
Say again.
So, if you don't mind, can you give an example of how you will present?
Excellent, I can see you. How will you present an answer?
Yes, sir. Like you said, keep it crisp at the starting and the ending and keep the last.
See, in this particular address, I can only give you points which you must implement to come out with an answer which is coherent, logical, crisp, and convincing. How to do it is what we'll cover in your mock interview boards.
Well, one of the things that I can go on to, with permission of sir, that I can go on to say is that is you ask me a question, I'll answer that question to you and allow sir to correct it, if that is on the right path or not. Will that be okay, sir?
Okay, no problem.
Okay. That will be, we're going to put it in the end.
Because when I get these talks,
Will that serve your purpose?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay.
So,
that would be a slight departure, but it's okay. I will take it in my stride. These talks that I give, not the first place and the only place I'm giving these talks, they're for you to get the essence of what I'm saying. And there are various ways of implementing it. Yours may not be the same as his, may not be the same as his or hers. Everybody has a different way of doing the same thing. Indian classical music, the classic difference between Indian classical music and Western classical music is this. Western classical music has a rigid format. Every singer has to sing exactly like that. Indian classical music, every singer sings the same rag in 10 different ways. That's what decides distinguishes Bhimsen Joshi from Nasikya.
Mallikarjun so.
All of them. Why there are different singers, different categories in classical Hindustan classical music? The rag is fixed. The notations of the rag are fixed. The aro is fixed, the avro is fixed. Which should be Shuddha Swar, which should be a Tivra Swar. It's all, there is nothing, it can't be altered. How you do it, how you weave that web is what decides. Like a woman knitting, same wool, same needles, but she knits better than she does, or he does. That's how you do it. That's one. Okay, I'll stop you for a while. Any questions on what I've said so far? So, any questions? Yeah, go ahead. What's your name?
Sir, I'm Neeraj.
Neil. Okay.
So my question is whether we can take stand during the interview. So some people say that you have to be neutral and just let the things pass. Some people say that you have to take a stand if there is an issue. And if you have,
Take a stand. What do you mean take a stand?
like if you have been asked about an issue and like any international relationship, then whether you have to take the stand your opinion if they are asking your opinion, whether it should be neutral or it should be against the for.
No, no, you're not getting into a debate there. You go for or against syndrome only in a debate. You ask for an opinion, you give your opinion. And give your opinion, don't give him his opinion. Be very careful about that. Don't give him his opinion, her opinion, give him or his opinion. Give him your what you think about it. And you must have reasons for it. Right? If you're the guy, they don't want to know whether you're right or wrong, they want to know how well you organize yourself. How much you know the background information, how much you have the background knowledge, and how well you marshal your arguments and present them. Right or wrong is, there can be 10 different rights and 10 different wrongs. Barack Obama's foreign policy or the Middle East fiasco, etc., there can be so many interpretations of it. If there was only one interpretation, there will be no conflict in the world. In fact, if there's only one interpretation of any provision of anything, there will be no system of justice system in the world. There will be no one argument, no adjudication, no arbitration, nothing.
So one single question I will ask. Sir, I am from Uttar Pradesh.
Ji.
So there are various answers which will include, you have to talk about politics of Uttar Pradesh. Like you ultimately there are some.
You can sit down, I can see you.
There are certain teachers say politics is responsible, but people say that you cannot, you have never talked about political leadership.
No, don't. There's a difference between talking about politics and politicizing an issue. You understand the difference? Is there anybody who doesn't understand the difference between talking about a political issue and politicizing an issue? Is it clear to everybody what the difference is? By now it should be clear to you. There's a great difference between politicizing an issue and discussing a political issue.
Sir, can you take an example?
Yeah.
That you have? Neeraj, maybe I'll be able to speak on behalf of you somewhat better. So there are two issues that the students here go to confront. One of them is that a lot of things are prevalent among the students that is based on perception. Am I correct? Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now these perceptions are very different from reality, generally. Now when he says that is whether he should go to take a stand or not, he means to basically to ask that is if there is an issue like that of land acquisition bill, should he go for or should he go for against it? Right? Am I clear? Now, as I will go to take a reply on that aspect, that is land acquisition bill is it properly understood? Is it going to be beneficial for the farmers or is it going to be non-beneficial to the farmers? It is beneficial to the farmers in as much as a good amount of land value and the degradation of the land value allows the farmers to migrate from rural areas to urban areas. So if the farmers start getting a good value for their land that is put to a non-agricultural use, they will not go to migrate to the cities, they will go to remain. So in as much as that aspect is concerned, it's good. But if it is that the land is acquired, a fertile land is converted into an industrial land, that may amount to a loss of agricultural land as well as agricultural productivity. No government will generally want that its farmers should go on to go unemployed and that their productivity should go on to be affected. They must go on to get a value for that land either from agricultural product or even from maybe industrial activity. That will be a good reply. Have I taken a stand? I have presented pictures on both the segments, on both the parts, right? When you're going to take a stand, you're going to tend to become rigid, right? Sir?
Take a stand only in a debate. When you're getting into a debate, you must take a stand. When you're confrontation with somebody, you have to take a stand. You can't say, "No, ye bhi theek hai, wo bhi theek hai." Hey, Baba, we are asking for to give us an opinion, talking in the parliament. What's your stand? What's your party's stand? The party says this is also okay, that's also okay. You can't do that. That's not the time to what we call be ambivalent. You can't be, there's no place for ambivalence. You have to take a stand, but that's in a situation of a debate. If you are talking about, you ask for an opinion. Okay, let me tell you one more thing about what he says, right? I agree with him entirely. Very large, it's an observation over a period of about, say, last 70 years. Almost 52 of them in public life and governance, armed forces. Indians, I'm singling out Indians because I've traveled all over the world, I've spoken all over the world. Indians are extremely quick on giving an opinion, not wasting time on gathering facts. We are short on facts and long on opinions. Ask anybody, you ask Shah Rukh Khan tomorrow about the Bodo problem in Assam, he'll give an opinion. Ask him, who are the Bodos? No, I don't know. But he has an opinion. Average Indian is very quick to give an opinion without bothering to get the facts right. I'll tell you the reason for it. Somebody wrote on it very eloquently many years back. Niraj Chaudhary. Have you heard of Niraj Chaudhary? You read his book called Continent of Sirs. He talks about even crisis of identity of Amartya Sen. He talks about an Indian being so keen to have given opinion because otherwise he says, I'm not having personality if I don't have an opinion. I must have an opinion. I must have an opinion. Or you have an opinion, Baba, but get your facts right first. Forming an opinion is the shortcut. Getting the facts right takes labors, intelligence, industry, research, background, homework. उसके लिए टाइम कहाँ है इसके पास? I must have an opinion. I've heard people give me opinions on all sorts of things, from rocket science to the mating habits of hippopotamus and off-mating season, anything. It doesn't take you any far. If you want to give an opinion, the opinion must have basic facts right. You can say, this is what I've heard, this is what they say, yes. But based on that, is what I'm saying. If you want to talk about a political question, for example. So, sir, but in UP, the land is being acquired against the will of the farmers and they are going to lose land, etc. All that Ghazal will ask you is, are you sure about this? Where have you read this? Who has told you about it? No, sir, why? ऐसा है. किसने कहा आपसे? So Akhilesh Yadav कह रहे थे. I said, but is that gospel truth? Is that the ultimate truth in life? No. You say that, sir. What I've heard is, CM say this is what it is. मुझे तो नहीं पता. This is what I've heard. A safer way of putting it. Than saying something as a factual position without adequate knowledge. Never ever state a factual position without adequate knowledge. Never. A, you go wrong. B, by and large, it may sound a very harsh word, but one tends to make a fool of himself or herself by taking position based on untenable facts or baseless facts. Get your facts right first. I mean, when you get in the habit of getting your facts right first, you'll find you have less and less opinions. Because you spend too much time getting facts right. It's safer to get your facts right first. Never give an opinion without facts. I've heard this from senior most functionaries in every walk of life in India. Giving opinions without getting their facts right. That doesn't cost anything, giving an opinion. Gathering facts does. And you are at a stage of takeoff in life that I was 50 years back, where I felt exactly like you. I thought I had enough facts with me to be able to have an opinion. Slowly it kept dawning on me that I didn't have other facts. Gathering facts takes a lot of hard work. So it's an industry to get the facts right. And unless you have that, never ever open your mouth. You might open it only to yawn, but not to answer. Yawning you can't help. But answering you have to give us a lot of second thought. Does it make sense what I said?
Yes, sir.
Get your facts right first. It's one of the biggest weaknesses I've seen in public life, anyway, student. People having very fiery opinions. Good to have fire in you, but don't let it come across through your answers without getting your facts right. There was a church incident in Jaipur when they broke up some statues in a church and vandalized the church. 2 days back, week back to 2 weeks back. I was happened to be in Jabalpur soon after that. I asked the local bishop of Jabalpur, who are these people? Were they the Hindu fanatics? Were they the Bajrang Bal or whatever, Bajrang Dal, whatever? He said, they were thieves. They came to look for the silverware. You know, all churches have candlesticks. You heard the story about the candlesticks? There's a small play where I think O. Henry, story of O. Henry. And the whole thing was put out as a act of vandalism. The physical act was the same, but the facts were not. The moment the facts came out, just quiet down. And no, when you depend too much on news channels, this is what happens. You have a huge proliferation of news channels. I am not against media, I am not for media. I have no bold opinion on these two things. But with the proliferation of news channels on TV, I think there are a couple of 100 channels now. In all languages, 100 channels. But there's not enough news to feed them. So what they do is they invent news now. Because every stringer, reporter has to give some input for the day. So they stretch, they bend backwards to invent news when there is none. And when that happens, whatever makes good copy gets highlighted. Sometimes by mistake, sometimes deliberately, whatever. But get your facts right first. Before reacting to this point, get your facts right first. And that also goes majorly for your forming an opinion. Very important to have your facts right before you form an opinion. But when you answer the question, say whether we should get the Security Council seat, whether India should get it or not get it, there are arguments for and against it. Get those arguments right first. Never give your opinion a personal tint. You know what I mean? Your opinion should reflect your personal biases. Should be based 100% only on facts. Then you are the safe ground. There is no harm being wrong in your opinion. What's wrong is giving an opinion without facts. That's wrong. You may not be right in saying that there should be no linguistic division of states. It's very easy to say that. You should undo the linguistic division of states. There was an organization called the States Reorganization Commission, SRC, in 56, 55, 56. The gentleman heading it called Mr. Fazal Ali. And he had an eminent person on board with him called not Panikar, Kunzru, H.N. Kunzru, I think. Hridayanath Kunzru. Hridayanath Kunzru said this. He says, we've been entrusted with the job to have a linguistic reorganization of states in India. We have been told to do it, so we are trying to find the best way of doing it. It does not mean I agree with it. Can you imagine a person, H.N. Kunzru, saying that to Pandit Nehru? So I don't agree with it, but I am asked to do a job. Like tomorrow you call an executioner to carry an execution in a jail. He'll say, I don't agree with this. It's against my beliefs that there should be no capital punishment. But are you an executioner? You paid for this, you committed to the job, do it. Or just say, I don't accept the job. It's up to you. So H.N. Kunzru was told this, if you don't believe in this, you might want to accuse yourself from this commission. H.N. Kunzru's reply was even better. He said, I have not said this to recuse myself. Just tell you my willingness to do this job to the best of my ability if that's the mandate. Like soldiers are asked to attack a particular position. He said, no, I don't think that should be done because there's issues. That's not for you to decide it. Either don't do it or do it to the best of your ability. That's a classic case. H.N. Kumru's dissent note on the SRC. It's a glowing chapter in the Indian field of freedom of expression. Very good. Even Nehru admired it, even if it was co-Kashmiri. Nehru was upset initially, but then Nehru was a very large man. Bigger man than a lot of us know him to be. So, the point I was trying to make was opinions and ability or willingness, preparedness to do something. This is, are you prepared to do this job? Or I say, I'm prepared to do it, but not willing to do it. You get somebody else, when you get it, I'll be very happy. There was nobody else at that time of that caliber. These three guys were probably the best they could find. K.M. Panikkar, H.N. Kumru and Vasudhara. Let's give one example. I haven't heard anything from a lady. How come? You have no questions? How many ladies are here? 1, 2, only 2? Okay. With fewer candidates, only 2 candidates, women candidates.
But it's not my fault.
Surprising.
Possibly. They may be a bit less exploring, but I don't have a clue on that part.
I'm not sure about gender bias, but it's surprising the number of women pilots we're getting in the Air Force today. It's an amazing fact. And every batch of cadets passing out from Air Force Flying or Air Force Academy, the upper 10, there were 6 out of 10 are women. 5 out of 10 are women, as much as that. And they have tucker, and they're not spared, they're actually put the same drill, same squeezer, same ringer. Yep, this is another question. Yep.
I have one question in this regard. When suppose if we were given a question as to should the women join combat units, fighting units? So how will we answer such a question? As we know that there is a sizable section of women in the defense services, but when it comes to their joining the fighting units, the combat units, how should we answer this if ever we get a question?
It's an interesting question, very interesting question. This question has been central to the issue of recruiting women in the armed forces ever since it started in 1992, 93 when it started. The sociological barriers, by and large, decide this issue of in what departments of the armed forces can women work. Very strong sociological issues. The issues are not the same in Europe, they're not the same in China, they're not the same in America, they're not the same in Africa, Middle East or India. They're very different. I'll give one short example. Women in the Air Force are allowed to fly helicopters and transport aircraft. I'm talking about the pilot, the flying branch. The few that go to the flying branch. And all these aircraft are restricted in peacetime to within a certain distance of the international border. You can't go beyond particular distance from the border. Combat aircraft, in any case, can't go with a much larger distance of the border. A much larger gap for combat aircraft because the fighter jets, when they realize they're too close, it starts turning. The radius of turn is so much, they can cross the border. If you have an incident where a combat pilot goes in or gets shot down because they won't ask a second question. Helicopters transport, they'll ask a second question, but fighter jets, Geneva Convention says you shoot down first, ask questions later if you cross the borders. You got shot down. I will not trust Air Force women fall into the hands of the Kabilis and the farmers in Punjab. Very obvious reasons. This doesn't happen in America or Germany or Europe. It happened in World War II. There were savages on the eastern sector. Things have changed since then. Practical reasons. Also troops you work with, combat troops, they are a different lot. They are not, in many ways they are not the regular people you meet over a drink or over a dinner or in a shopping mall or somewhere in a club. They are different people. They better be that if they have to do their job which they are doing. This takes us to another area of what you are saying, actually leads me into another area where we were disputing this employment of the armed forces for internal security against disturbances, insurgencies. It's a very tricky issue. We've been very vehement about not using them. A lot of people don't understand it. Politicians haven't understood. Defense ministers haven't understood this. The logic of it. I've heard very senior police officers say this. But use them, how are you using them instead of, they can also shoot, but they can shoot below the knee level, below the leg level. You don't have to shoot to kill a person. And Baba, that's what has been told from day one. Ek goli ek dushman, that he grows up with that thought from day one in the army. He sleeps with that, eats with that, he showers with that, he runs with that thought. How can you suddenly ask him to change? He's confused. Years and years of indoctrination has taken him to a certain level of being a killer machine. Let me use the word killer machine. You can't use him against your own people. He's confused. How can I shoot at these people? They are not enemy. He knows that they are not enemy. Now you tell him, Baba, ऐसा करो उनको गोली मारो उनको जान से नहीं मारना है. He can't understand that. He's not educated enough to understand that. You get the point I'm trying to make? Anybody has got any doubts on what I'm saying? You cannot change the indoctrination of a particular set of people for a short while, for 3 months, 2 months. Either he'll be ineffective or you'll lose him forever as a soldier. Choose. His basic indoctrination is to kill. You go to any forward unit in the armed force, and the Indian army. It's and everywhere written there. Ek goli, ek dushman. What it means is, every bullet you fire, as John Badman said, every ball you play, you must play for at least for a single. Nothing but just a defensive shot which is close, gets you no runs. Every ball you strike must at least get you a single. Everybody said that. Len Hatton said that, Badman said that. Same thing happens to soldiers. You can, and in that context, to control them, to lead them, at least so far, men have been more adept at doing that than women. Practical reasons. It will probably evolve in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And that strata will come up, in civilizational values will come up more, education levels will come up more. Women will get tougher and more hardened. It will happen slowly and steadily. It can't happen overnight. We have come a long way. We didn't have them as pilots till in the first few batches. They were logistics officers. Now they became pilots. Only transport pilots initially. Transport aircraft go up to 10 kilometers from the border. Then we got out, started making them helicopter pilots. They go closer to the border. In 5, 10, 15 years time, we probably use them as fighter pilots which can cross over. There is a certain latent, not hostility, something much more than hostility, bestiality in the business of killing. You can't ignore it. And those people better be that they have to do their job properly. You can't send, Bhavajar and tell them, say, stop hating your, please love your enemy. But time at the Goli Mara, but otherwise love them. The other thing is gone crazy, gone off his rocker. It's a very practical issue why women can't be used in combat, at least today. Tomorrow it will change, could change. It's changing fast. You take Israeli women for example. Israeli women have been doing it for a long time. Fighter pilots in the Air Force, commanders in the army, special troops, there are special forces with women in them. But those women are very different, brought up very differently, by a very different manner than what women in India have been brought up. They share the same dorm, they share the same showers. Will you do that in India? No way. Not because we are backward. We have a burden of history, we have a burden of culture, we have a burden of environment, burden of tradition. You try giving same dormitories to boys and girls in universities. Try and do it in India first. It happens in MIT, it happens in Harvard. So we must do it here. Can you do it? Not yet. Maybe it will happen tomorrow. Women and men and accepting the Air Force, women in the Air Force was such a huge thing. In the same crew room, in the same bar, women coming, it was a bhuchal in the armed forces. But we contained it. And now it's a non-event, it's a non-issue. But after 20 years, more than 20 years, it takes that much time to settle down. It's a new thing. And the gender bias in India is there. Hugely staring it in the face. You can't just bury it away, wish it away. Afghanistan, same problem. There's a little story I'm going to share, which is a funny story. 25 years back, the men and women walk in Afghanistan on the road with the man ahead of the woman. It has happened in India also. Still happens in Indian villages. They went somewhere, there was one chair, the husband used to sit down, the wife used to stand there. Doesn't happen in Indian villages? Yes or no? It happens in Afghanistan today. It used to happen in Afghanistan. The woman is a commodity. I'm not my personal opinion. Don't please mistake me for being anti-women. It's a fact. It was seen as a commodity. It's still being seen in areas of Rajasthan, Haryana, and Bihar. It's still being seen as a commodity. Unfortunate, very unfortunate. With that sort of a bias, the men looked at women differently. Equal in what respect? If you can have in 2015 a woman being hacked, a couple being killed for marrying without the permission of the local panchayat, what is it called, that panchayat there? Khapas. Where are we? We are not. I'm not saying we are not evolving. We are evolving. It will take time. It will happen over a period of time. Not today or tomorrow. First, let me see men and women having common dorms in universities. Are we anywhere near that? No. There you are. I think that answers your question very succinctly. Why women not in the combat units? You first show me a common, because you can't have, can you imagine logistics involved? Separate dormitories for women, separate showers for women, वहाँ कुछ होते ही नहीं है, all areas. There are hardly any facilities available. The logistic burden will be so fantastic on creating separate facilities for men and women. I don't know if you remember, in civil aviation, transport passenger aircraft in 50s, till 50s, there was separate loos on the aircraft for men and women. Can you imagine? Today you can't imagine this. There are toilets today. Anybody can use them. In early 50s, when it became Air India chartered out, two different sets of toilets. Men and women, like that from railway stations and new areas, on the aircraft. And that happened at the expense of seats. Commercially you couldn't afford it as we went along. So they had to scrap it under pressures of economy. But again, when that happened, Parliament went up in arms. There are lots of MPs, how can you do this? How can women use the same toilet? They said that in 52, 53. Today, can you hear anybody saying that? Evolution needs to evolve. We need to evolve. The gender bias is not imposed from top. It has to eradicate itself from the bottom. It has to disappear. Till that happens, things like this won't happen. Women being used in combat units. Not in India, not in Pakistan, not in Bangladesh, not in Sri Lanka. We share the same tradition, same culture. It will happen. And we are in the right direction, we are doing the right thing. Women are evolving, asserting themselves. Basically, an Indian man, what I know, maybe I don't know much about him, he balks at the idea of being commanded by a woman, told by something to do by a woman. He balks at the idea. Deep down. That has to change, that will change. You might have had a Prime Minister who was Roman, yes. But that doesn't change the basic ground reality. I'm just sharing this thought with you. I haven't prepared for this, I'm just sharing something which I've thought about or felt over a period of time. Any questions on this? Please ask me, clarify it yourself now. If you don't agree with any of this, if there are some other arguments. Worry.
Sir, every year some candidates get low scores. Sir, what are the common mistakes people do?
Okay, what's your name? What's your name? What's your name?
Sir, Piyush.
G?
Piyush.
Piyush. Okay, Piyush, right. You know what Piyush means?
Yes, sir. Honey.
Nectar. Amrit. Not honey. Amrit. Somebody might call you honey, but I don't get it personally with you. Okay, it's like this, Piyush, seriously speaking now. I covered areas which, I covered list of do's, right? And I covered list of don'ts. I think I covered them very exhaustively in large number of areas. The answer is, to your question is very simple. If you don't do the do's and do the don'ts, you get low scores. Once you get the do's right and the don'ts right, you have your answer. अगर हमने बताया आपको कि ठंड में गर्म कपड़े पहन के जाने हैं अपने बाहर, और गर्मी जब आएगी आप स्वेटर ना पहनिए, कोट ना पहनिए, और अब ठंड में निकलते हैं बनियान पहन के या स्विमिंग ट्रंक्स पहन के, तो you will have problems. Pneumonia हो जाएगा, ये हो जाएगा, वो हो जाएगा. Not you and anybody. So all you have to do is follow, understand the do's correctly, follow them. Understand the don'ts correctly, implement them. Your chances of not doing well keep increasing. Or failing, keep reducing. Doing well, keep increasing. There is such a huge number of points. And these, when I give these talks, I'm a bit general. I cover things generally because if I get into specifics of each area, 1, 2, 3, 4, it will take a month of Sundays to give a talk. Get the essence of do's as the essence of don'ts. Put them together. Don't do the don'ts, do the do's. You are sailing. Should be sailing. Have I answered your question? Anybody else?
Sir, while answering the question,
Sorry?
sir, while answering the question, do we need to,
What's your name?
sir, Prabhas?
Prabhas. Anytime you are in a public audience, when you have a question, must always remember to tell people who you are first. It helps. It's a custom.
Sir, while answering the question, so do we need to have an eye contact with every member, or do we need to have eye contact with the person who is asking the question?
Well, I thought I had covered this point adequately, but I'll repeat it for your sake. When answering the question, when I said, look at that member, him or her in the eyes. I didn't say them in the eyes, them or them. I said him or her. What does it mean?
Yes.
Got it. A lot of people have a question looking for approval from others, you know. मैंने क्या कहा, कैसे कहा, कैसे देखे It works in a public meeting, a lot of others speaking. Otherwise, in UPSC interview, you got to, person asks you the question, and don't have to turn yourself into the seat. They're just sitting, they are sitting in an arc of circle in front of you. Look from left to right and look at the person concerned. Intensely, but without trepidation. Directly they can, confidently they can do that, and look them into the eyes. The more you have eye contact, the more you are comfortable understanding the question and answering it.
So sometimes what happens is that when we look into the eye, we tend to forget what we are saying. So what
You're very right, you're very right. This is a matter of habit. You have to develop this habit of looking into people's eyes. Start from this moment, after talking to me. Anytime you speak to people, nobody tells us in school. This was hammered into us in schools when we were primary school, secondary school. They had this house masters, headmasters to make sure that a lot of things I learned in academy, I learned them in school or at home. The best tutorials in the world are conducted at homes, followed by schools, followed by grooming in the service and the world. There's no better place for tutorials than at home. It must start there. Every time you talk to somebody, we don't want to talk to anybody as children without looking in the person's eyes. It's not easy to be parents. It's a lot of unpopularity. If parents had stood for elections, half of them would win even one vote from children. It's a tough job, but this must, at some point of time, you all will be parents. It's a very unremittingly thankless job. You got to be tough, very hard, and very strong to accept this, that children will hate me for what I'm telling them. But they have to do it. Makes you good citizens. Democracy doesn't run in homes. It's a good thing, democracy, but after you've grown up, after you've done your schooling. The only thing that works in these two stages is single unidirectional discipline. And this point about eye contact is drilled into us as school children. We have no chance. I happened to go to a convent, and I remember the nuns telling us. She used to stop talking to us. She finished looking anywhere else. When you start talking to me, to look at me, please. When you start looking somewhere else, she would look somewhere else herself. Then you're wondering what happened. She said, I'm not listening to you, you're not looking at me. It had happened only 2 or 3 times, then got the point. Any time in life, to start talking to colleagues, students, friends, from this moment onward, it's a very intensive training. Look straight in the person's eyes, talking. You look at the nose, look at the forehead, look at the cheeks, look at the earrings, if you happen to be girlfriend. Look at something else. Not the right thing to do. Look into the eyes. Very fixed contact. It's a habit that has to be drilled into yourselves. At this stage, nobody will tell you this. You do it to yourself. It will pay very rich dividends in life. UPSC or elsewhere. Doesn't matter. And I can see that. I come across people who've been told this, who follow this system. It's so easy to communicate with them. They inspire a lot of confidence in you. If you're looking all over the place, even in their face, it doesn't inspire too much confidence. Look into the eyes and not doing Bharatanatyam while talking with your hands. It's very important. It's very, very important point. Remember that. It will stand you in very good stead. Now, one second. Let me hear a lady. I thought she couldn't speak. Tell me.
So my name is Reshma. If we are put in a situation where we have to take a stance which is not the same as government stance, how far should we assert it? Like, can we clearly take an anti-government stance? Or, like, how should we answer such questions?
I take exception to the word stand. You're not taking a stand anywhere. You take stand in a debate, as mentioned earlier. You have a view, you have an opinion, as long as your facts are right. Your facts, to the extent they're available to you, your facts, the fact they're available to you, are not the facts available to Narendra Modi or to Arvind Subramanian or to Arvind Panagadia. They have different resources, different facts. You at your level of education, social standing, educational background, environment, town, you have certain facts available to you. Go by those facts. And somebody asks, why do you say that? Because this is what I've been told. Then they tell you, no, there's much more to what the issue is than what you have been told. So I accept that. Say that. Because nobody at every level has all the facts right. And to adamant on but no, but I still believe. Keep lacing your statement, prefacing your statement all the time. From what little I know, honestly, from what little I know, what little I have seen, and then may not be hell of a lot. Land, Bhumi Adhikaran, big issue. How many people know what it is all about? How many of the people who debate this or have very high opinions know everything about it, at least the basics about it? They don't. So many issues.
Sir, can you go on to help build a bridge between between you and the students to an extent.
I'm understood.
I'll go on to take a perspective what the students go on to be thinking of.
Yes, you want to give Q&A?
See, why she is going to be asking this question is, it's a prevalent notion among the students in this place that you have to take a stand. When you are going to take a stand, you have a personality. If you don't want to take a stand, you don't have a personality. Correct? Now, that is from their side, sir.
Okay.
Okay? Now, you are correct, absolutely correct on that part. That is, unless you are going to be having your facts right, how is it that you can go to take a stand? And is it that you have all the type of facts that are available to a planner on the basis of which they have taken a decision? For example, the resources that the government has is, it can go to pick up a data all the way from the grassroots level, all the way from the district level, from all the ministries, and it is on that basis that they go on to make a policy. Correct? Do you have, I'll go on to subject this answer to such scrutiny. Do you have that much amount of resource on the basis of which you can go to prove the government wrong? Any decision that the government goes to take, that goes to take by taking into account the information that is goes into gather from the block level, from the district level, from the state level, as well as from various ministries. And no decision is perfect. It is meant to serve certain particular purpose. Now, if it doesn't go to serve a particular purpose, you can always go to retrospect it and retrospect after some amount of a time. And in retrospection, you can always go to think better, right? Now, taking a stand in this case means saying yes, absolutely yes, or absolutely no. I don't think that we're going to live in a world where we can go to say absolutely yes or absolutely no. So, Mr. Paul.
Next question.
No, I have not answered that question, sir. I have given an answer that is subject to scrutiny.
Well, I'm not adjudicating here. All I'm saying is, preface your statement by saying, from what I know, or little I know, maybe very little. This is what I think. Man, every human being is a product of his or her experiences, his or her own access to information, and his or her own perceptions. Right? You can't fault him or her because these limitations are self-evident. What little you know, this is what I think. I'm convinced that what RJD is doing is wrong, or what communists are doing is right, or what Congress is doing is. There's no harm in having an opinion. There's no. As I said, discussing politics is not the same thing as politicizing an issue. Very fine difference. Very fine difference. But there's a very, very major difference. So, at the end of it, someone will ask you, you still think so? So, this is, from what I have known, what, as I said in the beginning, what I have known, what little I have read, this is what I feel. I'm willing to go and revisit the issue. So that, always show willingness to revisit an issue. If you've been told that maybe what you're saying is not right, don't start agreeing with the person or not. Don't change your opinions just because he's told or she's told. It shows a willingness to revisit. It shows an openness of mind, a maturity of approach. It's very important in life, anywhere in life, to have an open mind. You know, how Bernard Shaw defined a fanatic? You heard the word fanatic? What's a fanatic? Can somebody tell me what a fanatic is?
A person who allows his passion to influence his opinion.
Okay, good definition. Anybody else?
Or some fixed ideas also.
Good. Any third idea? Any third definition? E?
Extreme view.
Okay. Anything else?
Indoctrinated.
Huh?
Indoctrinated.
What you're trying to say is, what you're saying is brainwashed. There's a difference between indoctrination and brainwashing. By and large, fanatics are brainwashed people. They're not only indoctrination.
They are intolerant towards views of others.
Okay. Right, right. Anything else?
They are very rigid and stereotype.
Sorry?
Rigid, non-flexible.
Yes, very rigid, yes. I'll give you George Bernard Shaw's definition at the end of it all. He put it so beautifully. You heard of GBS, George Bernard Shaw? Okay. He said, fanatic is a man who does not know his mind and won't change it. I have not heard a funnier definition of a fanatic than this. Who does not know his mind, actually does not know his mind and won't change it. Now, how can you change your mind if you have a mind? If you don't have a mind. He says he does not have a mind and won't change it. That is a fanatic. There's a lot more to this definition, but it's the most succinct definition I've ever heard of a fanatic. What you're saying is right, but this subsumes all those definitions what Bernard Shaw said. It subsumes all of them. Not one of you was wrong. Everybody was right. But what he said was put it most succinctly, most concisely. A fanatic is a man who does not know his mind and will not change it. The other definition of fanatic is person who's made up his mind. Don't confuse him with facts. He's telling you that. I've made up my mind, don't confuse me with facts. If you give me facts, I'll get more confused. I'm very confused. I made up my mind. I don't confuse me with facts. Why I told you that was to have an openness of mind, for never ever close your mind to ideas and suggestions. This doesn't mean you become undecisive. You're going to be decisive in life. These are contradictions in life we'll forever be contending with. How to have an open mind, how to be decisive, how to be focused, how to have a broad view, yet be very pointedly focused. All this is important. Sometimes the same thing, this will sound like contradiction in terms. How can we focus and have an open mind? How can decisive and still listen to people? Essential.